him and Bruce Lee were like such a tango, you know? And it really, I started karate because of that.
He shared the screen with Bruce Lee. He crushed a decade-long bodybuilding title before he ever became a movie villain. Millions still fear today. And for over 50 years, Bolo Yeung has stayed almost completely silent about what really happened behind the cameras that made him a legend. Now, at 79, that silence is finally breaking. What comes next isn't a highlight reel. It's the story fans have waited decades to hear.
Bruce Lee, then Jean-Claude Van Damme, and then who? After Jean-Claude Van Damme, who is the next? Nobody.
The friendship nobody expected, the tragedy that changed everything, and the truth behind a career most people think they already know. They don't. The body before the fame. Before Bolo Yeung ever stepped in front of a camera, he was already becoming something rare. Born in Guangzhou, China, he was drawn to martial arts as a teenager, not for the fighting itself, but for what it demanded. Total control over the body and total control over the mind, working together as a single discipline rather than two separate pursuits. He tried several martial arts styles early on, sampling different systems the way most young athletes naturally do before settling on the one that actually speaks to them. But it was bodybuilding that gave him his first real taste of mastery. Yeung didn't train like someone with a hobby. He trained like someone chasing a title, and he got one. He became Mr. Hong Kong and held that title for an entire decade, a stretch of dominance that few competitors in any era, in any discipline, have ever managed to match. That achievement wasn't the goal. It was the groundwork, the years of unseen effort that would eventually make everything else in his story possible. Learning in the shadows. By the late 1960s, Hong Kong's film industry was booming, and it needed something new. Actors who didn't just perform strength on camera, but who actually had it. Yeung fit the moment perfectly. His earliest roles were small, sometimes uncredited, easy to overlook entirely by anyone not paying close attention. He appeared for only a handful of seconds in some productions, filling a crowd scene or standing silently in the background of a shot someone else was headlining. To an outside observer, it would have looked like nothing. But Yeung didn't treat any of it as filler. He treated every set as a classroom. He watched how directors built a scene, how choreographers built a fight, how a performer could say everything without saying a word. He paid attention to lighting, to camera angles, to the small technical choices that separated a forgettable action beat from a genuinely thrilling one. None of it looked like destiny at the time. It looked like a man quietly preparing for something he couldn't yet see coming. His physique made him a natural fit for a very specific kind of role. The villain. The imposing muscular threat the hero had to overcome. Plenty of actors would have resisted that box, worried about being reduced to a single note. Yeung climbed inside it instead and made it his own, turning what could have been a limitation into a signature that audiences came to recognize instantly. When he appeared on screen, there was no need for a director to explain who held the power in the scene. His presence did that work before a single punch was thrown. The breakthrough. Every career has a hinge point. For Yeung, it came with The Heroic Ones, directed by the legendary Chang Che. Cast as a stern, unyielding warrior, Yeung didn't have pages of dialogue to work with, but he didn't need them. In a film packed with talent, in a cast full of performers all fighting for the same handful of memorable moments, he was the one people remembered walking out of the theater. That kind of attention doesn't fade quietly. Directors started seeking him out specifically, casting him again and again in roles that leaned entirely on his physical command, rather than a traditional range of dramatic performance. And with each part, Yeung sharpened something that would define his entire career. The ability to communicate rage, restraint, menace, even respect, using nothing but presence, posture, and the way he held a room's attention without raising his voice. By the early 1970s, momentum had a name, and it was his. Hong Kong action cinema was breaking out internationally, no longer confined to local audiences, but pulling in fans across Asia, Europe, and eventually North America. Yeung was positioned to ride that wave straight into rooms he'd never been invited into before, building a reputation that would soon reach far beyond anything he could have imagined as a young man training in a gym in Guangzhou. The meeting nobody expected. Here's the part of the story that surprises even longtime fans. The meeting that would define the rest of Bolo Yeung's career didn't happen on a film set, in an audition room, or on a martial arts stage. It happened during the filming of a cigarette commercial, an ordinary, forgettable shoot for Winston, of all things, the kind of job most actors take on and then never think about again. That's where Bruce Lee first saw him, not in a fight scene, not in a screen test, not in any setting designed to showcase a performer's talent. In a commercial, of all places, Lee noticed something in Yeung that other people had walked right past. A stillness, a density of presence, a sense that this man wasn't performing strength for the camera, he simply had it. And the camera was only catching up to what was already there. Lee remembered him, and not long after, that instinct turned into a partnership neither man could have fully predicted at the time. Enter the Dragon, a film that would go on to change both of their lives, in very different ways. If you've never seen what these two built together on screen, this is the moment worth sticking around for. So, if you want the rest of this story, including what really happened in their final scene together, make sure you're subscribed because it only gets more intense from here. The man Lee had become. To understand why that moment on a cigarette commercial set mattered so much, it helps to understand who Bruce Lee already was by the time the two of them crossed paths. Lee had been building toward this for his entire life. Born in San Francisco in 1940, he moved to Hong Kong as a child and began training in Wing Chun at just 13 years old under the legendary Yip Man. But Lee was never satisfied with simply learning an existing system. Even as a teenager, he was already questioning the rigid structures of traditional martial arts, looking for something more adaptable, more efficient, more honest. That search eventually led him to the United States, where he studied philosophy at the University of Washington, while continuing to train and teach. It was there that he began developing his own martial art, Jeet Kune Do, built around speed, practicality, and the rejection of unnecessary rigidity. Teaching martial arts in Seattle, and later in Oakland and Los Angeles, put him in contact with figures in the entertainment industry, and it wasn't long before Hollywood took notice. His first major role, as Kato in The Green Hornet, showcased his speed and precision to American audiences. But the show only lasted 2 seasons, limiting how far his fame could travel in the United States. Frustrated by an industry that kept offering him narrow, stereotypical parts, Lee made the decision to return to Hong Kong. It turned out to be the right one. The Big Boss shattered box office records. Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon followed, cementing him as a genuine phenomenon across Asia. By the time Lee stood on that commercial set and noticed Bolo Yeung, he wasn't a rising talent anymore. He was already one of the most electric performers Asian cinema had ever produced, a genuine phenomenon whose name alone could fill theaters. And he was about to bring Yeung along for what would become the single most significant film of both of their careers. Enter the Dragon. Enter the Dragon would become one of the most significant action films ever made. And for two men who shared the screen in it, the film meant two entirely different things. For Bruce Lee, it would be his final role. For Bolo Yeung, it would be the beginning of everything. In the film, Yeung played the villain's towering right-hand man, and his fight scene against Lee has been studied and celebrated for decades as one of the finest pieces of choreography in the entire history of cinema. Watch it closely, and you'll see exactly why. It's a scene built on contrast. Lee's blinding speed against Yeung's immovable strength, precision against power. Two completely different languages of violence speaking to each other in perfect rhythm. Lee was a perfectionist about every second of it. He didn't just want movement that looked good. He wanted every strike to mean something, to serve the story being told, to reveal something about the character throwing it. Nothing was left to chance, and nothing was allowed to look accidental. Yeung brought years of bodybuilding and martial arts discipline into those sequences, giving them a weight and believability that elevated the entire film. Audiences could see and feel that the force behind every exchange was genuine. And here is something that tends to catch people off guard. Off camera, these two rivals were actually close. There was real warmth between them, a friendship that had nothing to do with the characters they were paid to play or the animosity their roles demanded on screen. That off-screen trust is exactly what made their on-screen intensity so convincing. Two men who respected each other enough to push one another to their absolute limit on camera without either one holding back, because they both knew the other could handle it. During the making of that film, Lee also did something Yung never forgot. He shared pieces of his own martial art, Wing Chun, teaching Yung details about balance, timing, and precision that only someone at Lee's level could offer. It wasn't a formal lesson. It was two men discussing the very thing that defined them both. Lee's discipline extended past the physical. He treated his diet as seriously as his training, believing that what he put into his body directly shaped what his body could do. That philosophy left a lasting mark on Yung, who adopted the same disciplined approach and carried it with him for the rest of his life. The day everything changed, and then suddenly it was over. In 1973, Bruce Lee died. He was 32 years old. Take a moment with that number. 32. Not an actor fading into his later years, not a career winding down after decades in the spotlight. A man at the absolute peak of his physical and creative powers, weeks away from releasing the film that would make him a global icon, gone before he ever had the chance to see it happen. Enter the Dragon hit theaters after his death. Think about what that actually means. Lee never sat in a theater and watched an audience react to that fight scene with Yung. He never read the reviews calling it one of the greatest action films ever made. He never got to witness the exact moment his name became permanently woven into the history of cinema. The film that would define him forever is also the film he never got to see finished. For Bolo Yeung, this wasn't a headline scrolling past on a screen. It wasn't a distant tragedy playing out in someone else's story. It was the loss of a friend, someone who had looked past a routine commercial shoot and seen a kind of potential that nobody else had bothered to notice, someone who had sat with him and shared pieces of his own art, one-on-one, without needing to, simply because he wanted to. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone just as a shared chapter is closing, before either of you fully understands what the future was supposed to hold. Yeung didn't get the luxury of stepping away to process it. He had to keep working. He had to keep showing up on sets, in front of cameras, in an industry that had just lost one of its brightest and most singular lights, without the person who had helped him find his own place inside of it. Imagine what that must have felt like. Walking onto a set in the difficult months that followed, surrounded by people still in shock, still trying to make sense of a loss that didn't feel real yet, and having to find a way to keep performing anyway, camera rolling, as if nothing had changed. It's worth sitting with that, because it reframes everything that came after. Every role Yeung took in the years that followed wasn't just a career move. In some quiet way, it was a continuation, a way of carrying forward the discipline, the intensity, and the standard that his friend had set, even when that friend was no longer there to see it, carrying the torch. In the years after Bruce Lee's death, Bolo Yeung became one of the defining physical presences in martial arts cinema. His imposing build and unmistakable authenticity made him the natural choice for roles that demanded real intensity, not the illusion of it. He carried the same disciplined lifestyle Lee had modeled for him, the same belief that diet and training were inseparable, foundational to who a performer really was on screen. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Yeung kept working steadily, taking on roles across Hong Kong action cinema that continued to build his reputation as one of the genre's most physically convincing performers. Then, in 1988, a new generation of action fans discovered him all over again through Bloodsport, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. Yeung's performance as the villainous Chong Li introduced him to an entirely new audience in the West, one that had grown up on American action films rather than Hong Kong cinema. The role became iconic in its own right, quoted and referenced by fans for decades afterward, and it opened the door to further work in American productions, including a role alongside Van Damme, again in Double Impact a few years later. What's remarkable is how consistent Yeung remained across all of it. Whether he was working on a Hong Kong set in the early 1970s or an American production 2 decades later, the fundamentals never changed. The same discipline, the same physical conditioning, the same refusal to fake what could instead be real. Directors on both sides of the Pacific came to know him as a performer who didn't need stunt doubles or camera trickery to sell a moment of raw power, because he simply had that power to begin with. Whether cast as a towering antagonist or an unstoppable physical force, Yung brought the same quality that had first caught Bruce Lee's attention in that unremarkable commercial all those years earlier. An unmistakable, unforced presence that never needed flashy editing or camera tricks to convince an audience of what he was capable of. The full truth. Looking back now, at 79, the full shape of Bolo Yeung's story is finally visible, not as scattered headlines or half-remembered movie trivia, but as one complete arc. A teenager chasing discipline in Guangzhou, a champion who dominated a title most people never even knew existed, an actor who turned typecasting into a signature, a friend who stood beside one of the greatest martial artists who ever lived, and who kept standing long after that friend was gone. For younger fans discovering him today, often through clips of Bloodsport or that unforgettable fight scene in Enter the Dragon, it can be easy to see Bolo Yeung as a single moment frozen in time. The towering villain, the imposing figure standing across from the hero, a face pulled from one iconic scene and nothing more. But that flattens a life that was actually built across more than 5 decades, in 2 different film industries, on 2 different continents, spanning eras of cinema that had almost nothing in common with each other, except for what Yeung brought into every single one of them: discipline, authenticity, and a presence that never needed to be manufactured. None of it happened by accident, and none of it happened quickly. It happened one uncredited role, one training session, one disciplined choice at a time, until a bodybuilder from Guangzhou became one of the most unforgettable faces in action cinema history, recognized by fans who weren't even born when he first stepped in front of a camera. That's the real truth behind the legend. Not a secret, not a scandal, but decades of quiet, relentless commitment that most people never got to see up close until now. A rare friendship that outlasted a devastating tragedy. A career that outlasted an entire era of filmmaking. And a man who, even now, at 79 years old, still represents exactly what he always did. The idea that presence, discipline, and authenticity will always outlast the trends built to replace them. If this story moved you the way it moved us to put it together, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories exactly like this one still to tell. Legends, friendships, and the honest truths behind the films that shaped a generation of action cinema. Let us know in the comments what stood out to you most. The discipline, the friendship, or the legacy Bolo Yeung is still carrying forward at 79 years old. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end, and we'll see you in the next one.